What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. Let's see if we can do a video that actually sticks around. One that doesn't get kicked off the platform. So we're not going to be talking about anything to do with all that other stuff that happened in the last week. We're actually going to get back to Canadian politics this morning, but something that's interesting, especially if you're one of our American viewers, as civil war has broken out in terms of between all of our premiers, all of our provincial premiers and the federal government. And when I say civil war, it is a reference point to, the Marvel Civil War. If you missed those movies or don't watch them, essentially what happens in that movie is a team of superheroes that all agrees with each other, fights together, gets along together like a team. Government tries to step in, claims overreach. Some people agree, some heroes don't agree, and they end up fighting each other. They end up going at each other, turning on each other, and that's essentially what's happened in Canada right now when we're talking about its Notwithstanding Clause. Now, give me a brief moment here, folks, because we have had a surge in new viewers coming in from the United States as of recently, again, with all the events happening. Big shout out to those subscribers. Thanks for joining us on the channel. I want to give a brief disclaimer. I'm going to lay out exactly what is going on, and then we're going to talk about how this is going to work out and how things are essentially going to heat up as Quebec's bill is now pushing a unity crisis, I guess you could say, across the country. So for anybody who doesn't know, again, who's watching from another country, who doesn't get our politics, I'll give you a brief rundown. You have your provinces, which is your provincial government, and you have the federal government, which is essentially Mark Carney, Parliament Hill, and each are in charge of their own rules and regulations. The federal government handles big stuff like defense, trade, immigration, while as the provincial government essentially handles smaller things like education, healthcare, and local laws. Essentially, the government between the provinces and the federal is like a big family where everybody has their own house rules, but they have to follow some shared family rules to avoid total chaos. So for a little brief history lesson, if you're talking about the Notwithstanding Clause, we have to go back to the creation of the Canadian Charter of Rights. So in 1982, Canada got its own constitution. It's basically a rule book for the country, which includes, so it's kind of like our American Constitution in a sense. It's not really respected like the American's Constitution is. I'll get into that later. But it includes the Canadian Charter of Rights of Freedom. So it's kind of like a Bill of Rights. It's part of the Constitution and promises basic protections for everybody in Canada, like freedom of speech, equality, the right to travel, fair trials, courts, especially the Supreme Court of Canada. Top judges can strike down laws that break these rules, and it sounds good, but there's a small problem. The star of the story, officially called Section 33 of the Charter, is nicknamed the Notwithstanding Clause or the Override Clause. Plain English, it's basically a special escape hatch that lets national parliament or a provincial legislature pass a law and say this overrides or ignores certain charter rights for up to 5 years. Really only applies to a specific rights like, free speech, equality. It doesn't really apply to voting rights or language rights in some cases. But after 5 years, if they want to, they can, or they must renew if they want to keep using it, which really forces politicians to face voters about it. It's up to the people at that point, which gives a level of control. So back in the 1980s, when Canada was finalizing its constitution, provinces, especially Quebec, didn't want courts bossing them around on cultural or local issues. Instead, on the safety valve, like elected lawmakers could have the final say sometimes. It's been used rarely, about 20 times from the data that I have, total since 1982, mostly by Quebec. It's controversial because it lets governments sidestep human rights protections. So that's where all of this is coming from. So as of today, what's the big hubbub of what's going on? Why are all these premiers going after each other? Well, things are heating up big time at the Supreme Court as the court is hearing a major case about Quebec's Bill 21. It's a 2019 law that bans public workers in authority roles like teachers, police, or judges from wearing religious symbols like hijabs, turbans, or crosses on the job. Quebec says it's about keeping government neutral and secular. Critics, including Muslim and Sikh groups, of course, because why not, call it discriminatory against religious minorities. There were cases in places across Canada where those of Sikh were saying that they should be allowed to wear their turbans and not have to wear motorcycle helmets when driving around. Certain things like that. Of course, they'll draw straws whenever they can. We've seen what happens with the abuse in our country. But Quebec used the Notwithstanding Clause right from the start to preemptively shield the law, so no court could strike it down. Even if it violates equality or religious freedom rights, the law basically survived lower court challenges, but now it's in the Supreme Court, care of Sean Fraser. Again, I'm going to get to that. Hearing date isn't set yet, but in the last few days, all the players filled their final arguments. And here's where the drama started. The federal government, so Justice Minister Sean Fraser, has filed papers saying the clause is important, but the courts need some power to check it, meaning the government needs to be able to override anything anyway, so your rights don't really exist. They want the Supreme Court to rule that even with the override, judges can still declare a law violates rights, which could lead to things like compensation for victims or political backlash. They worry repeated or broad use of the clause could shrink charter rights to nothing, basically amending the Constitution by sneak. Fraser says that this isn't just about Quebec, it's for all governments, and the ruling could set rules for years. So they try to set it up like, oh, you guys got to give us some more power. We have to be allowed to interfere. We all saw what happened during the Freedom Convoy where the government overstepped their bounds when they enacted the Emergencies Act against the truck drivers. So this is the problem, and I always say, whenever any government wants to step over their jurisdiction, don't give them that power. They never give it back. Anytime the government says, we just need to amend something or add some new privileges for us, hell no. Never. Quebec's response to the whole thing is they're furious. They're calling Ottawa's push a, quote, direct attack on Quebec's laws and on all provincial powers. Premier Legault, his team says that the clause is a fundamental part of the Constitution. Elected politicians, not judges, decide what's best. They argue the challenges to Bill 21 are just second-guessing voters. And Quebec used the clause legitimately to balance the right with societal values like secularism. So Alberta also weighed in. Premier Danielle Smith's government is defending the clause as a hard-won compromise. They're saying that it protects provincial independence. They're okay with Quebec doing what they're doing, but they warn that limits would undermine the Constitution through the back door. So again, this is just giving access where it shouldn't be granted. Ottawa, similar vibe, they back Quebec, saying the clause is essential and the courts shouldn't meddle. Or Ontario saying that, sorry, not Ottawa. Ontario, the province of Ontario, meaning their premier, says it's essential and the courts shouldn't meddle in it. They shouldn't have a right. You get corrupt judges or those who are getting influenced. So if the Supreme Court were to side with Ottawa, it would make the clause harder to use wildly. Giving the courts more teeth in protecting rights better. If it sides with the provinces, governments get freer reign, but it might also erode trust in the charter, meaning people will say, well, what's the point of having it? In fact, Canadians are already saying that after the Freedom Convoy, because they're saying our rights have never been respected. And I can almost assume, as I'm saying this, people are writing in the chat, hey, my rights have never been appreciated. They've never been respected. Again, how many people donated to the Freedom Convoy and had their bank accounts frozen when they have the right to choose? They have the right to travel. We were locked in our homes during the pandemic and told you couldn't get on a plane. You couldn't leave the country. Mobility rights are a huge part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Look, either way, it's kind of a peek how Canada's power sharing works. It's going to spark bigger fights between federal and provincial leaders, as we've already seen. And they're saying that the decision won't even come until 2026. So this is going to play out big time as we move forward. Forgive me for looking down throughout this. I made notes. I wanted to make sure we were very clear on everything so that this video doesn't get slapped for misinformation. Because again, YouTube's been striking these videos down. Make sure, if you're liking the content, hit a thumbs up, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, hit your bell for notifications. It all helps us, folks. It's greatly appreciated. So Danielle Smith tweeted out, the Notwithstanding Clause is integral to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's an unassailable provincial constitutional right. While the Alberta government does not support the content of Quebec's Bill 21, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Quebec's constitutional right to invoke the Notwithstanding Clause as government deems fit. So I think, again, what part of the concern here is if Alberta were to ever use this, say if it were to vote for its independence, and the Canadian government said, well, we're not going to respect that. We're not going to respect the Notwithstanding Clause on that referendum vote. It essentially means that everything your province is doing is useless. The government has the final say. Danielle goes on to say, we're extremely disappointed the federal government would risk national unity and a foundational principle of our Constitution by attempting to attack the use of the Notwithstanding Clause by a sovereign provincial government in this manner and request they withdraw their appeal to the Supreme Court immediately. So you've got Danielle Smith, you've got Doug Ford in Ontario, you've got a couple other premiers that are standing on the side of, hey, we have to respect Quebec's right to use their Notwithstanding Clause. You now have Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew coming out on the other side saying, we're standing up at the Supreme Court to protect religious freedom, civil liberties, and democracy. Bill 21 would prevent people from wearing visible symbols of their faith. Even the Notwithstanding Clause courts must still rule, so power stays in your hands. So they're virtue signaling, essentially, to try and garner up votes because Manitoba's got woke voters. Sorry to anybody who lives in Manitoba. Look, I grew up in Winnipeg, but I also understand who their voters are. I think there's no debating that they're very easily leaning left on a lot of issues. There are some conservatives out there, good conservatives. I know a lot of those voters watch this channel. So again, I don't mean to insult anybody, but having lived there for, just over a decade, I understand a little bit about how Manitoba votes. What we're essentially talking about here is Sean Fraser. Here's his statement on Canada's intervention as we go down. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a pillar of our democracy and a reflection of our shared values. It guarantees fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of thought, belief, expression, religion, and association. It also guarantees equality before the law and the right to life, liberty, and security of a person. The Charter protects these rights for everyone in Canada, and they are at the heart of our democratic society. So essentially what this is, in a nutshell, is the federal government is saying, look, we don't have to respect the Charter of Rights if you protest the government. If you're going to stand up and actually use your rights accordingly, and we disagree with it. If provinces are going to use the Notwithstanding Clause to just easily skate past anything that the federal government would disagree with, well, we don't really like that anymore. So just because it offends us, because we want more power, we're going to step in and we're going to screw with all of it. We're going to let judges have the final say. And again, you can have paid off judges, influence judges, however you want to cite it. You've got people down here in the comments. Sorry, I scrolled off of it. You need to be arrested for treason. This is the work of a tyrant. If you want clarification on the law, just ask legislatures. Sean Fraser is effing peak retard. His statement, oh really? Remember Ottawa and the truckers' protest? Again, why are you so intent to usurp the power of legislatures making unelected judges rule? Do you even understand that without this clause, there would be no constitution? That's essentially the biggest argument here. This is where I'm saying it's sparking civil war between all provinces. They wanted a unity crisis, and it's not just coming in the state of Alberta and Saskatchewan talking about independence anymore. This is the government literally tearing down the country. And I wanted to show all of this because when you go back over to what Danielle Smith said, I've got another video coming up later about the task she has ahead based off of some of the statements I made on live streams when it comes to Alberta Independence and what she essentially needs to do if she doesn't want to risk losing her job at this point. People aren't happy with her. And you can see that in the comments here. Danielle, can you not understand? The WEF, their hidden masters, the whole squad of WEF plants in the government and business, they do not recognize the Canadian Constitution or Canada as a state or Alberta as a province. They don't care about the Supreme Courts. It goes on to say we need to separate. We need to claim independence. This case is about more than the immediate issues before the court. I'm curious what or who he could mean by that. He highlights the importance of the Charter as a guarantor of life, liberty, and the security of a person. Those are quite important fundamentals for everybody. Is a notwithstanding clause worth the trade-off if it can't be used as anyone sees fit in the future? I say no way, Jose. Quebec did it 12 times. Now Alberta doing is a threat to sovereignty. What do you need to realize? They're not going to let you play ball? I mean, Canada's done. Get on with Alberta independence. One more reason to closely look at all the options on the table and choose the one that best supports Alberta and Albertans. This would be egregious on a nation-breaking level. Invoke the Clarity Act. If they want to take power in this way, call their bluff. I mean, people aren't happy. Steve here saying, dial up separation support across the board. If the court even hears this, and you, Danielle Smith, need to stop trusting anything Carney and company say, because they have been talking out two sides of their mouth. So they could slide this in before boxing you in, or boxing you and us in. 51st state grows closer. Like, people aren't happy. How many times do you need to be shown that Ottawa has not, does not, and never will accept any interpretation of provincial powers that restricts central authority? The feds view us as subjects over whom they rule, not as fellow citizens with whom they should cooperate for strength and unity. Alberta Separation, it's long past time. The comments keep going in that motion, folks. This is strewn all over Danielle Smith's post. I have a video coming out later today. If you're curious about Alberta's independence, if you're curious about how Danielle Smith has been essentially passing the buck for Mark Carney and the very uphill battle she now has put herself in, check out that video. Because while we're going to call out a few things, I'm also calling out how Danielle can fix this and right this storm. And I sincerely hope she listens to it. I know she watches the channel. I know her people watch this channel. I really hope the message gets through. But when it comes to the notwithstanding clause, folks, what do you think? Do you think this is the government overreaching and overstepping? Do you think this is going to cause more of a national unity crisis? Do you think people are really going to get their arms up in the air about this? Or do you think it's simply going to dissolve, the government's going to get what they want, and Canada is going to continue to crumble? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If it's your first time here, I hope this video's earned your subscription. Again, please leave a comment, a thumbs up, share it out on your socials. Anything you do to those usual YouTube jazz requests, folks, really helps the channel. We could really use the help, especially now. With the amount of videos that have been pulled off the channel this week, I would love to see this channel hit 140,000 viewers by the end of today. We're not too far away. Make sure to hit that button if you haven't already. Join me live tonight and every Wednesday and Friday night on the channel for our live shows. Tonight is Friday Night Fringe, as I'm joined by the beautiful Mrs. Fringe, as we'll talk about everything that happened this week, everything we know coming up ahead, as well as Q&A within the greatest YouTube community on the platform. I look forward to chatting with you guys in that live stream. I look forward to chatting you every Wednesday and Friday night here on the channel, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, live. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.